Imagine this. You're scrolling through an endless stream of content, your thumb moving mechanically across the screen, your eyes glazed over by the hypnotic rhythm of digital distraction. Hundreds of videos flash before you: lifestyle tips, entertainment, news fragments, all of it washing over you like white noise. But then something stops you. Not a flashy thumbnail or clickbait title, something deeper. Something that seems to peer directly into the hollow space behind your ribs where your authentic self once lived. Stay with me until the end, because the final insight I will share is not only Carl Gustav Jung's phenomenon as the call to individuation, a psychic process where the soul refuses to continue living under the masks that have been constructed to please, survive, and fit in. This video is not just content, it is a mirror, a symbolic reflection that reaches you exactly when your conscious mind has no more answers. But the unconscious already knows it is time to act, but also a key that can transform how you relate to the world forever. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. You pause, your finger hovers over the screen, and in that moment, you feel a recognition so profound it's almost frightening. This content didn't find you by accident. It found you because you've reached that breaking point, that silent scream in the wilderness of your own existence, where something inside you has finally said, enough. But here's the paradox that will haunt you. Why do the most important messages in our lives arrive disguised as chance encounters? Why do we stumble upon exactly what we need to hear at the precise moment when our carefully constructed worlds begin to crumble? Is it synchronicity, as Carl Jung called it? Or something far more unsettling, the unconscious mind's desperate attempt to save itself from complete dissolution? You see, there's a terrifying truth hiding in plain sight. The life you're living right now, the one that brought you to this moment of recognition, isn't really yours. It's a carefully curated performance, a series of roles you've been playing so long you've forgotten there was ever an actor beneath the mask. You wake up in the morning and slip into character. The dutiful employee, the agreeable partner, the responsible adult, without ever asking the most dangerous question of all. Who am I when nobody is watching? This question terrifies us because it implies something we've been desperately trying to avoid. That we've been living as strangers to ourselves, automated beings responding to programming we never consciously chose. We've become so skilled at this performance that we've convinced ourselves it's authentic. But authenticity doesn't require constant maintenance. Truth doesn't exhaust you. Real life doesn't leave you feeling hollow at the end of each day, wondering why success tastes like ashes in your mouth. The moment you clicked on this content, something shifted. Not in your external circumstances, those remain exactly as they were seconds ago, but in the quality of your attention. Suddenly, you're not just consuming information, you're confronting a mirror, and what you see there isn't the polished version of yourself you present to the world. It's the raw, unedited truth of a soul that has been suffocating under the weight of other people's expectations. This is the moment when victims of their own lives transform into the heroes of their own stories. But heroes aren't born from comfort, they're forged in the furnace of necessity. When the old ways of being become more painful than the terror of change. You wouldn't be here, absorbing these words with such intensity, if part of you hadn't already recognized that your current trajectory leads nowhere you actually want to go. There's something both beautiful and tragic about this recognition. Beautiful because it signals the beginning of genuine awakening, the first crack in the shell of false identity that has imprisoned you. Tragic because it means acknowledging how much time you've spent sleepwalking through your own existence, how many opportunities for authentic living you've let slip by while you were busy being who you thought you should be. But this moment, this precise intersection of readiness and recognition, is sacred. It's the place where transformation becomes inevitable. You can feel it, can't you? That mixture of terror and excitement that comes when you realize you're standing at the edge of everything you've known, looking out into the unknown territory of who you might actually be. The question isn't whether you're ready for what comes next. The question is whether you're finally tired enough of the lie to embrace the frightening freedom of truth. Because on the other side of this recognition lies a life so authentic, so aligned with your deepest nature, that your current existence will seem like a half-remembered dream of someone else's choosing. Something has already shifted inside you. Can you feel it? The old certainties beginning to crumble, making space for something entirely new to emerge. If this content is making sense to you, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. because what you are about to learn could change the way you see life, people, and yourself. The prison you find yourself in wasn't built overnight. It was constructed brick by brick, starting from the moment you first learned that love was conditional, that acceptance came with a price, and that price was the slow, systematic betrayal of your authentic self. Carl Jung understood this with devastating clarity. He recognized that modern civilization creates what he called the adapted man, a being so thoroughly molded by external expectations that they become strangers to their own soul. We are raised not to be ourselves, but to be palatable versions of ourselves, not to feel deeply, but to feel appropriately, not to question, but to comply. This process begins innocuously enough. A child expresses anger and is told they're being difficult. They show vulnerability and are labeled too sensitive. They display creativity and are redirected toward practical pursuits. Each correction, each subtle redirection, each well-meaning piece of advice builds another bar in the cage of false identity. The child learns to suppress what is natural and amplify what is rewarded. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, the internalization of values that serve the herd rather than the individual. We become slaves not to external masters, but to internalized voices that whisper constantly, "Don't be too much. Don't want too much. Don't feel too much. Don't dream too big. Stay small. Stay safe. Stay acceptable." The psychological mechanism behind this is more sinister than we realize. What we call normal is actually a state of chronic dissociation, a splitting of consciousness where the authentic self goes underground while a performing self takes the stage. This isn't mental illness. It's the default state of socialized human beings. We learn to live outside ourselves, observing our own lives as if watching someone else's movie. Arthur Schopenhauer revealed the tragedy of this condition when he wrote about the will to life being constantly thwarted by the principle of sufficient reason, the endless chain of social obligations, expectations, and rational justifications that keep us trapped in cycles of unfulfilling existence. We want to live, but we're taught that wanting itself is problematic. The family system, well-intentioned as it may be, becomes the first training ground for this split. Parents, themselves wounded by their own truncated authenticity, unconsciously pass down patterns of suppression. Don't cry. Be grateful. Think of others first. Don't be selfish. Each directive, while seemingly moral, teaches the child that their natural impulses are wrong, dangerous, unacceptable. School systems amplify this conditioning. Sit still, follow instructions, don't question authority, compete, but don't upset anyone, excel, but don't stand out too much. The message is clear. Your value lies not in who you are, but in how well you can perform the role assigned to you. The family system, well-intentioned as it may be, becomes the first training ground for this split. Parents, themselves, wounded by their own truncated authenticity, unconsciously pass down patterns of suppression. Don't cry. Be grateful. Think of others first. Don't be selfish. Each directive, while seemingly moral, teaches the child that their natural impulses are wrong, dangerous, unacceptable. School systems amplify this conditioning. Sit still. Follow instructions. Don't question authority. Compete, but don't upset anyone. Excel, but don't stand out too much. The message is clear. Your value lies not in who you are, but in how well you can perform the role assigned to you. By adulthood, this programming runs so deep, we mistake it for our own voice. We choose careers based on status rather than passion. We enter relationships that look good on paper rather than feel alive in our bodies. We make decisions based on what we should do rather than what would genuinely fulfill us. Viktor Frankl observed that this disconnection from authentic purpose creates what he termed existential vacuum, a hollowness at the center of existence that no amount of external achievement can fill. We become successful failures, accomplished zombies, living exactly the lives we're supposed to want while dying slowly inside. The most devastating aspect of this conditioning is that it makes us complicit in our own imprisonment. We don't just submit to the system, we become its enforcers, policing our own authenticity and that of others. We shame ourselves for wanting more, for feeling restless, for questioning the path we're on. But this very restlessness, this growing discomfort with the roles you've been playing, is your psyche's rebellion against this systematic self-betrayal. It's not depression, it's awakening. It's not a crisis, it's an emergence. And it's trying to tell you something crucial about the life you've been avoiding. What you don't realize is that living this divided life, authentic self buried, performing self on display, creates consequences that ripple through every aspect of your existence in ways so subtle you've learned to mistake them for normal human experience. Your body keeps the score of this betrayal. That chronic fatigue you can't explain? It's the exhaustion of maintaining a persona that requires constant energy to sustain. The tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach, the headaches that appear without obvious cause. These aren't random physical complaints. They're your body's rebellion against living a lie. When you betray your authentic nature, your nervous system registers it as a threat, keeping you in a perpetual state of low-level fight or flight. Neuroscience reveals the devastating truth. Chronic inauthenticity literally rewires your brain. The neural pathways that once connected you to your genuine desires, intuition, and creative impulses begin to atrophy from disuse. Meanwhile, the circuits devoted to hypervigilance, people-pleasing, and performance anxiety strengthen through constant activation. You become neurologically trapped in patterns that serve everyone except yourself. Your relationships become theaters of mutual deception. When you don't know who you are, you attract people who are equally lost. You bond not through authentic connection, but through shared performance anxiety, two actors supporting each other's illusions. You mistake intensity for intimacy, drama for passion, familiarity for love. Real intimacy becomes impossible because it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires knowing yourself well enough to share something genuine. The confirmation bias kicks in with cruel precision. Your unconscious mind, desperate to maintain the illusion of choice, begins filtering reality to support the narrative that this performed life is actually what you want. You notice only the evidence that confirms you're on the right path while becoming blind to the mounting signs of spiritual starvation. You celebrate promotions in jobs that drain your soul, anniversary milestones in relationships that feel like elaborate roommate arrangements, achievements that look impressive on social media but leave you feeling emptier than before. Perhaps most insidiously, you begin to lose access to your own emotional truth. Anger becomes stress. Grief becomes being negative. Joy becomes unrealistic expectations. Your emotional vocabulary shrinks to socially acceptable terms that reveal nothing and heal nothing. You learn to describe your inner world in the language of productivity and optimization rather than meaning and fulfillment. The shadow, everything you've rejected about yourself to maintain this acceptable persona, doesn't disappear. It goes underground, emerging in passive-aggressive behaviors, sudden outbursts of rage, addictions that seem to come from nowhere, and self-sabotage that appears just as you're about to achieve what you thought you wanted. You find yourself mysteriously drawn to people and situations that embody everything you've denied in yourself, creating chaos that temporarily breaks through the numbness of your curated existence. Your creative life withers, not just artistic creativity, but the fundamental human capacity to envision and create new possibilities. When you're locked into performing a predetermined role, the very idea of transformation becomes threatening. You lose the ability to imagine radical alternatives to your current circumstances. Your dreams shrink to fit the limitations of your performed identity. Time becomes your enemy rather than your canvas. Each passing year feels like further evidence that you're running out of opportunities to change, when in reality, each moment of growing discomfort is your psyche preparing you for the transformation it knows is inevitable. You mistake the death of illusions for the death of possibilities. The most tragic consequence is that you begin to believe this diminished version of existence is simply what adult life looks like. You normalize the numbness, rationalize the emptiness, and convince yourself that anyone who claims to be living differently is either lying or naive. But your soul knows better, and it's been sending you increasingly urgent messages. The rebellion begins not with grand gestures, but with the radical act of telling yourself the truth. Not the sanitized version you've been rehearsing for others, but the raw, uncomfortable truth that you've been avoiding because it threatens everything you've built your identity around. This is what Jung called confronting the shadow. Not just acknowledging the parts of yourself you've rejected, but integrating them into a more complete understanding of who you are. The anger you've been suppressing isn't wrong. It's information about your boundaries being violated. The selfishness you've been ashamed of isn't evil. It's your authentic needs crying out for attention. The restlessness you've been medicating isn't pathology. It's your creative life force demanding expression. The first act of rebellion is learning to distinguish between your voice and the choir of internalized critics that have been running your life. Start paying attention to the quality of your internal dialogue. When you hear, "I should," ask yourself, according to whom? When you feel guilty for wanting something, investigate. Whose approval am I afraid of losing? When you find yourself automatically saying yes to requests that drain you, pause and ask, what am I really afraid will happen if I say no? Friedrich Nietzsche understood that true transformation requires what he called the revaluation of all values, the courage to question every belief, every assumption, every should that guides your decisions. Not to become nihilistic, but to discover which values are genuinely yours versus which ones you've inherited without examination. This is terrifying work because it means admitting that much of what you've considered moral, responsible, or mature might actually be forms of self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The practical rebellion starts small but strikes at the core. Begin saying no to invitations that feel obligatory rather than exciting. Start expressing preferences you've been hiding to avoid conflict. Allow yourself to feel disappointed in people and situations without rushing to rationalize their behavior or minimize your feelings. Stop performing enthusiasm for things that bore you. These seemingly minor acts are actually profound declarations of selfhood. The rebellion requires what the existentialists called authentic anxiety, the discomfort that arises when you stop living automatically and start making conscious choices aligned with your genuine nature. This anxiety is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're finally doing something real. It's the friction between who you've been pretending to be and who you actually are. Historical figures who embodied this rebellion understood that authenticity is not a destination but a practice. Gandhi's truth-telling, Rosa Parks' refusal to comply, Thoreau's civil disobedience. These weren't one-time acts of courage, but daily commitments to honoring inner truth over external pressure. They knew that freedom isn't given. It's claimed, moment by moment, choice by choice. The rebellion culminates in what might be the most radical act of all, taking full responsibility for your own happiness and fulfillment. Not in a self-help, positive thinking way, but in the existential sense of recognizing that no one is coming to save you from the life you've created. No perfect partner, no ideal job, no amount of external validation will fix what can only be healed through the courage to live as yourself. This responsibility is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means admitting that you have been the author of your own dissatisfaction. Liberating because it means you also have the power to write a different story. Here is the truth that will either liberate you or haunt you for the rest of your life. The moment you truly see yourself, not the curated version, not the aspirational version, but the raw, unfiltered reality of who you are right now, everything changes. Not because you become someone different, but because you realize you were never who you thought you were to begin with. This is Jung's ultimate insight about individuation. It's not about becoming something new. It's about becoming what you've always been underneath the layers of conditioning, trauma, and social programming. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are buried and in need of excavation. Every authentic impulse you've suppressed, every dream you've abandoned, every aspect of yourself you've rejected, they haven't disappeared. They've been waiting in the unconscious, preserved like ancient artifacts, ready to be reclaimed. The profound realization is this: you have been living your life as if you were a supporting character in someone else's story. Your parents' story of who you should become. Society's story of what constitutes success. Your partner's story of who they need you to be. Your employer's story of the ideal employee. But you are not a supporting character. You are the protagonist of your own existence, and the plot has been waiting for you to step into the leading role. This shift in perspective is so radical, it can feel like a death and rebirth happening simultaneously. The person you thought you were the one who needed approval, who feared conflict, who minimized their desires to keep peace, that person was real, but they were also a survival strategy, masquerading as identity. When you stop needing to be that person, they don't violently disappear. They simply become one part of your larger, more complex, more authentic self. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the concentration camps. Even in the most extreme circumstances, there remains a space between stimulus and response where freedom exists. Not the freedom to change your circumstances, but the freedom to choose your response to them. This space, this gap between what happens to you and how you interpret and respond to what happens is where your authentic life lives. It's where choice becomes possible, where transformation occurs, where you stop being a victim of your own existence and become its conscious creator. The ultimate paradox is this: the more authentically yourself you become, the more connected you feel to everything else. When you stop performing for others, you discover genuine intimacy. When you stop seeking approval, you find real love. When you stop trying to fit in, you attract people who appreciate your uniqueness. When you stop pursuing happiness as a goal, you discover joy as a natural byproduct of authentic living. This is because authenticity is not selfish, it's the opposite. When you're being genuinely yourself, you free others to do the same. Your courage to live truthfully gives others permission to stop performing. Your refusal to participate in collective deception creates space for honest connection. Your willingness to be disliked for who you are instead of loved for who you're not transforms every relationship you have. But here's what no one tells you about this transformation. It's not a one-time event. It's a daily practice, a continuous choice, a commitment you make to yourself again and again. Some days you'll slip back into old patterns. Some days the pull of approval seeking will feel stronger than your commitment to authenticity. Some days you'll wonder if it wouldn't be easier to just go back to sleep. This is normal. This is part of the process. The difference is that once you've tasted genuine aliveness, the counterfeits become increasingly unsatisfying. Once you've experienced the relief of being yourself, the exhaustion of performing becomes unbearable. Once you've felt the deep satisfaction of making choices from your center rather than your periphery, external validation loses its addictive power. The final realization, the one that changes everything, is that the life you've been afraid to live is not some distant possibility requiring perfect circumstances. It's available right now, in this moment, through the simple act of telling yourself the truth about what you actually want, feel, and know to be right for you. It doesn't require permission from others, perfect timing, or ideal conditions. It only requires the courage to stop betraying yourself and start honoring the wisdom of your own experience. You don't need to quit your job tomorrow or end your relationship today. You don't need to move across the country or completely reinvent yourself. You just need to start listening to the voice inside you that has always known what authentic aliveness feels like. That voice has been with you all along, waiting patiently through years of performance and pretense, ready to guide you home to yourself the moment you're willing to listen. This video found you because that voice finally got loud enough to cut through all the noise. It found you because you're ready, not ready to have all the answers, but ready to start living the questions, ready to trade the safety of certainty for the aliveness of mystery, ready to become who you've always been, underneath everything you thought you had to be. The transformation has already begun. Not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve, not when you feel more prepared. Right now, in this moment, with this recognition. The only question remaining is, what will you do with this awareness? How will you honor this call from your deepest self? The answer, like everything else authentic in your life, can only come from you.